It's 3:20. I'm bringing the jury in. The defense is, based on what they told me, last witness is taking the stand. I'll bring the jury in. All right, the jury's back. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of scheduling, this is the defense's last witness. I expect this witness to be done in the next hour approximately, which means then, based on what I've been told, I will expect the defense to rest. If there's any rebuttal from the state has told me it's going to be very brief, 1 or 2 witnesses, 10 or 15 minutes. Now, I know when you hear estimates from me and the attorneys, they have a big kind of ish on them. You know, I say go up for 15 minutes and it's 20 minutes, or we say a witness will be short and then they're not exactly short. But this is the defense's last witness. After this witness, we'll discuss finishing and completing the case, including jury instructions and other matters. Sir, if you can stand and raise your right hand, please.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Please be seated. State your full name, spelling first and last for the record.
John Black, John Black.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, Dr. Black. Can you tell us briefly, what is your occupation?
I'm a consultant. I retired from police work after 23 years. I retired from the military after 30 plus years. The areas I consult in include anything from business strategy. I hold a doctorate in business intelligence, how people turn information using decisions, visual information, into actual action. That is also linked to, and it deals with how I work and consult in with police agencies and how they deal with anything ranging from use of force to leadership to training and similar.
Okay,
And similar? Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Black, where are you based out of?
I currently am based out of Central Oregon.
Okay, and you're joining us from there today?
Yes, sir.
You flew in to the Chicago or Milwaukee area?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you have some experience in law enforcement. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
I believe you said 22 years? Or was it
Well, a little over 23 years, but yes.
23 years. And what sort of experience did you have when you used to work in law enforcement? What were your duties?
So I started out as a patrol officer. We had, and then went up through the normal ranks that you expect, corporal, sergeant. I also oversaw training. I was a training sergeant for many years. I then, in the agency I was at, I was a lieutenant. The agency that I was at, also in Oregon, had approximately 700 employees, and I did both work on the police side or patrol, as well as corrections. Throughout that time and the different positions that I had, I created the intelligence unit for the detectives. I oversaw, when I was in the detective division, I oversaw anything from homicide to sex crimes to fraud to you name it. When I was in the patrol division, I was an operations lieutenant. I oversaw all the normal things you would associate with patrol operations, responding to calls, staffing, budget, all those type of things, all the way up through. When I was in the support division, which housed training and everything else, I was also the head of professional standards. And professional standards is usually where the internal affairs review is. So I oversaw internal affairs. I was a internal affairs sergeant, which was an investigator level. And then eventually I was the person that oversaw all of internal affairs as well. I helped write policy. I created a use of force database. There was just a myriad of functions. I sat as a representative on the Human Rights Council, oversaw the mobile response team. I was a negotiator for many years. I mean, there was a bunch.
All right, well, that is quite an extensive resume. I want to talk specifically about, in your experience in law enforcement, did you utilize or were you familiar with videographic or video evidence?
Oh, we basically used it daily. If you think about it, a robbery comes in and we have maybe some traffic cam or some other type of video evidence or cell phone evidence or cameras from an ATM. As a patrol officer, we use video evidence for eyewitness lineups or something similar to that. Regardless, it is a form of evidence, and it was used, I can't think of a time when it wasn't. In corrections, I would take a look at use of force complaints, for example, or something similar. And if you notice, like you see in here, in public safety facilities, we have cameras, and so there would be video evidence, and you would review that video evidence. But
Okay. And just to stop you right there, Doctor, you also mentioned that you had some military experience. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
And in your role at the military, can you tell us what sort of video or videographic evidence you had experience with while you were in the military?
I hold a lot of what they call military occupational specialties. One of those specialties I hold is a special operations specialty, which is known as intelligence and operations.
If you could speak up.
Speak up, please.
Understood, is a special operations specialty known as intelligence. In intelligence and operations, you commonly look at different forms of intelligence, which could include things like imagery intelligence, electronic intelligence, human intelligence. I was an intelligence officer. We routinely used video or videographic surveillance, satellite imagery, whatever, as a form of intelligence.
Okay, so just to sum that up, you used video and video evidence or surveillance as a form of intelligence to do your work in the military.
That would be fair.
Okay. Now, in this case, you were retained by the defense to educate the jury as to video evidence generally. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, without getting into the specifics of the actual facts of this case or the actual video in this case, I just wanted to discuss some of the concepts that come into play when there is video evidence. So, can you tell us just basically, and I'm sure this is an obvious question or an answer, but what is the difference between, video that we're seeing versus what we see with our eyes in the real world?
Okay, so this answer also comes from I'm certified in video evidence at what's called an examiner and a metrological level in how you process and use video evidence. And one of the things you learn during these certifications, and you learn with the experience I just described, is that the video itself is very good. It has great use in looking at the objective parts of the world. We can see things move on it. We can see cars and people and other things that we would normally see in an investigation. And so we'll simply call that the physical aspect of the world. Distances, times. There's certain limitations to this. Those limitations are, well, what's the angle that the video is looking at? Is it the same angle that a human might look at? How high is the video? How far is it away? What's the video camera doing? Is it enhancing the light? Take an example. When you look through your cell phone, for example, and you see something, and when you look through your cell phone, it looks straight, like a road edge or something else. But your cell phone has a fisheye lens on it. It's not seeing it that way. There's an algorithm in there that makes it straight, which is why you can see something close and see something far away. So while it has great value, it's very, very good at the objective world, all of this stuff that we're looking at here, but it's very limited to the degree of not being able to talk about or display to you the subjective world, what we feel, what we were thinking, how we were deciding, all of those different types of things.
Okay, and fair to say that video is a two-dimensional sort of depiction of a three-dimensional reality.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you explained some of the differences that there are in perception, and I think you were saying that video or video surveillance, videographic evidence, that sort of stuff is objective. So when you say it's objective, what were some of the things that fall in that category?
Okay, so for example, if there was a piece of video that, as a consultant, that I was looking at, what could I be able to determine from that? Well, I could probably take a look at frame rate or frames per second. You've seen that on probably your cell phones or anything else. I know how fast it's going, how fast it's recording. I could probably figure out the timestamp, like what time of day, if I trusted these type of things. If I look into it deeper, I can figure out maybe what's been done to it. I can figure out what angle this thing is moving at, a person, a vehicle, these types of things. Those things that are occurring in physical space, what I refer to as the objective world, it does it very well. Secondarily to that, I can figure out what didn't happen. I don't see any of this occurring, or I don't see any of that occurring. It's very good for helping that out.
Okay, so when we see a video, in relation to what the actors, let's say there's some actors depicted in a video, and by actors I mean persons, does it necessarily show us, and this may be obvious, does it necessarily show us their perspective?
It's incapable of doing that. I mean, that's the short answer. I mean, imagine the last video you took on your cell phone. And you took it of a child's party, of a pet doing something, whatever it might be. It will show you the actions of whatever it is that you're taking a video of. It cannot show you the emotions of that thing you were taking a video of. It can't tell you what it was thinking. It can't tell you when it was thinking whatever it was thinking. And it can't tell you what you were thinking when you were looking at it. In fact, if you post such a thing, you would then tell people, hey, this is what I'm thinking. It's cute or anything else. It simply doesn't have the capacity to do that.
Can you explain to us, let's say, from a first-person perspective, if I'm looking at something and I'm focusing on something with my own human eyes versus if I'm capturing something on camera, what is the difference, if any, between focus when it comes to video and the human eye?
This is primarily something that's speaking more towards, we'll call it attention. So again, let's use the same platform, the cell phone. Everybody's got a cell phone, and we're going to take a selfie. And how many of you have seen all of a sudden there's something in that selfie that you never expected to be there? Well, why is that? Where was your attention focused when you were taking the selfie? It was focused on you. All that other stuff in the periphery shows up after you look at it in hindsight, after you look at it after the fact. Now, it doesn't mean anything's wrong, it doesn't mean anything's right, it's not a judgment call. It means that simply was where your attention was focused. The camera's different. The camera, sometimes they use a term, it's called the all-seeing eye. A camera, when it looks at everything, in its field of view, in everything you see from that upper left corner down to the bottom over here, everything is in focus. And you get to choose when you're looking at the recording after the fact, which thing you're going to look at. And you're also looking at it knowing, for the most part, what has already occurred. You know where to look. You know what you're looking for. You don't have that advantage if you're on the front end of it.
Okay, now, can you give us an example of like selective attention?
I'm from Central Oregon. I drive in the snow. You guys drive in more snow than I do, so we'll go back to the day before yesterday. If you were driving up here during the normal time I was to get here in the morning, you probably had to tap your brakes at least once or twice, and it probably didn't end up the way you exactly planned. Now, you will probably remember, and if it wasn't yesterday or morning or whatever, just some other time you drove in the snow around here, you will probably remember pushing down on that brake pedal. And you remember how hard you pushed on that brake pedal as your car was sliding towards something you really didn't want to hit. Can you tell me how many other cars went past you during that time? Can you tell me what the person was wearing that drove by you? The reason, most likely, you can't is because, in short, it didn't matter to you. All that mattered to you at that moment was the brake and the thing you're about to hit. In high-stress situations, in time-compressed situations, this is the reality. You remember that? That's important. Your body does a very good job at taking care of itself in those type of situations, at paying attention to what matters.
Okay. Now, based on your expertise, are you familiar with the concept of hindsight bias?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell us just a little bit about that? What does that mean?
Biases in general are simply the way that our mind works, and we tend to lean one way or the other. They're not bad. Bias is not meant to be confused with the words like prejudice or anything else. Bias just means that sometimes we have a tendency, the human brain has a tendency, we have a tendency to do certain things. Another way, they're sort of like leanings. Hindsight bias is the idea that knowing how something has turned out, since we now can see it, we go backwards in time and say, well, it was obvious. It was obvious that this is what was going to happen. It was obvious. Well, the easiest way to understand that is, if it was so obvious, then why did the person do it? If it was that obvious, and not to be demeaning, the person wasn't an idiot, then why did they do this? Think about all your friends where you look backwards and you say it was obvious. The fact is, the reason is because you didn't know the future. When we're going backwards, and so back to what I do when I investigate, I review, I analyze, one of the biggest things we have to do as researchers and reviewers, whatever you want to call us, is guard ourselves knowing about hindsight bias. Because it's a human thing. No matter how much you do it, it's going to happen. You just have to be aware of it and guard against it.
So you have to actively take some measures, I guess, in your mind to guard against looking at things in hindsight. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, fair to say.
And what is outcome bias, if you know?
Outcome bias is very similar. So when something turns out an outcome that we don't, it's undesirable. It didn't turn out the way we planned, the way we wanted. It's unexpected. It loses a company $1 million, or it's a tragedy of some proportion. Someone makes a decision in a chemical plant or something. Because the outcome is undesirable, unexpected, tragic, whatever term you want to give it, we then have a tendency to judge everything that led us there as wrong, to be a poor quality. But the fact is, that's not a judgment of the decision. So one of the easiest examples I've had given to me, and I think it's a fair one, is Scully landing a plane on the Hudson River. What happens if everybody drowned? Would he have still made the right decision? That's an example of judging by the outcome. You could have a tragic outcome with a sound decision. You could also have a perfectly desirable outcome with actually a poor decision. The trick is, especially in what I do, is to be looking at the decision, and we have to guard judging it by the outcome.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Ross.
So I don't have that many questions for you. But you had talked about how video can't capture necessarily the perspectives of the people that are in them. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I believe you even said it's impossible basically to do so.
Yes, sir.
Especially if we're talking about cameras, you know, that aren't like the phone you were using about, but like security cameras, the ones we see here, they're not going to have my perspective or your perspective, right?
Absolutely correct.
And so therefore, if someone is, you know, describing an incident and it's not, doesn't, you know, show everything, or they don't describe everything that we see in the video, it doesn't mean they're lying, right?
No, sir, it doesn't.
Could just be their perspective was different.
Absolutely correct.
It could mean that certain things stuck out in their mind more than other things.
Yes, sir.
So when a person is describing what they saw, it doesn't really make much sense then to put on a video and go, well, you said this, but the video shows this, right?
Objection, Judge. I mean, that's very broad and vague.
And there's an excellent legal.
I'll withdraw the question.
Fine, it's withdrawn, you can rephrase.
Let's go to this. Basically, just because someone possibly doesn't remember exactly what we see in a video, it doesn't mean they're lying, does it?
It does not.
Could just mean their perspective was different.
Also correct.
It could mean they just didn't see that one moment in time.
Also another possibility.
Could have looked away.
Yes, sir.
So the video is good for what it can do, and witnesses can tell us what they saw. Right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Nothing else?
Defense, anything?
Just very briefly. But as we talked about on direct, there are some things that objectively just are true that you can determine from video. Is that correct?
The physical aspects of usually such things as a scene or distance or anything else, video is very good at determining that.
Okay. And there may be instances where some objective facts have nothing to do with point of view or perception. As in, let me rephrase that, as someone's perspective or perception may not necessarily have anything to do with whether something occurred.
Could you rephrase? I'm really not sure I'm understanding the question.
I understand.
Dr. Black, I think the witness is confused, I'm confused, let's rephrase.
So we were, I know it's getting late, Judge, but thank you very much. So my question is this. So we established that in videos there are things that objectively occur. And is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay, and then we also established that subjectively there are beliefs that people have, or there's perspectives that they have based on where they are or what they're focusing on. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Okay? Now, you can have a situation where there's no way that that perspective or that person who has that perspective can deny what occurred objectively and be telling the truth.
You can have that situation with equal merit. You could also have the situation posed by the state, which is they could also be, their perspective could not comport or match reality. That doesn't mean that they were necessarily intentionally deceptive in any way, shape, or form. They can coexist. Conversely, what you just put forth could also exist. They could be potentially intentionally they could be lying. And that's the reason it doesn't comport with reality. But the fact is, there's a saying, is you can still be honest and not accurate. And we have to take that into account when we review these type of events.
Okay. And what sort of are there any factors that can help people determine the difference between, accuracy and honesty?
Objection, Your Honor. That's outside the scope of.
I'll withdraw the question. No further questions.
It's outside the scope, it's withdrawn.
I have nothing else. Thank you.
All right, you can step down, doctor, thank you. Defense have any additional witnesses?
No, defense won't.
No, Your Honor, the defense rests.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to send you out. It's 3:50. He'll be back in 5 or 10 minutes, probably 10. We'll discuss how we're proceeding for the next hour and tomorrow morning. So if you can follow my bailiff out, please. Back shortly. Leave your notepads where they are, please. All right, the jury's out. The defense rested. Is the state planning any rebuttal?
Your Honor, can I have 2 minutes to think it out? That's all I need. Just 2 minutes.
Off the record.